well, actually systems are built by people, right? If you have good people and you have good processes and your good people have good experience, right, they will be able to build any kind of system and optimize it in any kind of ways. So if engineers told you that the queue is huge and it prevents them from doing their job, basically, then maybe it makes sense to check this queue regularly, right? So, and we decided to start checking it, and it became our main metric. Then there are reasons behind this queue, right? We have a limited number of builders. So probably if the build takes too long, then you cannot build too many other configurations because of that. And we started to monitor our heaviest builds, so basically to free our builders. And like the third and the fourth layer is just about like regular monitoring of things.
Just to make it clear, when you talk about the queue size, you mean if you have dozens of developers committing and pushing, you're talking about the things that are stacking up in your pipeline, the requests that are waiting to be processed.
Yes. So they're just stuck in waiting for start their build, basically.
Right.
So it's kind of a waste. We've chose our queue size as basically our North Star metric. But in reality, it's actually a proxy metric because it's not that interesting how long is a queue before you, right? For you, the only thing that matters is what kind of delay is going to be caused by this queue size. So actually, when we are measuring the queue size, we are kind of proxy measuring the delay that is caused by this queue to a certain build. Why we are using queue size instead of using pure queue delay? Because it's actually really hard and really tricky to calculate the queue delay, because basically delay is going to be different for different builds because they have different positions. So should we measure average delay? Should we measure mean delay? Should we measure like percentiles? And when it's getting that kind of complicated and complex, it's really hard to make some actions afterwards. So I prefer simplicity over complexity because it's more action. It's easier to work with the queue size. It's easier to optimize it. And naturally, if you reduce the queue size, your queue delay will be reduced as well.
I love that good enough, right? Because that implies you don't need to be perfect. You can dial in different, I mean, it almost sounds blasphemous to say you can dial in different levels of quality, but sometimes you can't. And sometimes from an engineering point of view, treating things more holistically as a system, and especially if you understand, we like optimizing for a single point, maybe we need to do that, but maybe not, right? So like, that's actually a really valuable phrasing of helping people realize that there can be some judgment as to this is good enough. Like we can get 80% of what we're after for 20% of the effort.
We will like to make sure that we reduced our queue as good as we can, that we optimize it as good as we can. Why? Because queue causes unpredictability. When you have queue, you don't know how long would it take for your build to actually be completed. It could be like 5 minutes, it could be 10 minutes, it could be 15, it could be 55. And when you have like a standard build and it's going to take like 50 minutes to build it, well, you have the predictability at least. So first things first, work with predictability. It's key, it's crucial.
We're the driver towards, like Dmitry said, we want predictability. Why? Because I want to know, is it a 5-minute coffee break, or do I have to go out to lunch before I wait for this thing or whatever? Predictability is helpful, right? It reduces our stress, so to speak. I think that's probably the biggest reason, is because we need to be more human-centric to recognize, for us to do our best work, we need to think about us as a big integral part of the system anyway, versus just the nuts and bolts.
I had a lot of like iterations around objective measurements of code review time, PR size, whatsoever. And at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like it worked in a way that I would expect. Then I switched my personal approach to measuring the actual experience, developers' experience, and maybe sometimes to combine this subjective feedback from engineers with some kind of objective data from our systems, but from particular systems, not all of our systems. And I think that's the best way to measure something, is to actually combine objective measurements with subjective experiences. Surveys and experiences should be in the first place. because at the end of the day, if you have some measurements, if you have some objective measurements, the next thing you want to do, you want to improve it, right? You want to optimize. And how do you do that? First, you should understand how does this data is being collected. To do that, you need to talk with people. Next thing, you have to define like bottlenecks. And to do that, you most probably have to talk with people and plan some actions with people. So I just think that we can get to the chase straight away and just ask people, what do you think prevents you from doing your job better? In my opinion, it works really, really well, this approach of subjective feedback and developers' experience surveys, some action items afterwards.
Great points. It makes me think of the objective metrics, failure rates, and the DORA metrics, or any one you want to pick. Those are lagging indicators, in every sense. From the perspective, how can you affect those? Yeah, it goes back to kind of what we've been talking. How can we set up an environment where it's not punitive for me to be accountable?
In our developer surveys, we have two types of questions. We have like purely subjective type of question, like what do you think about the reliability and stability of our CI/CD? And the second thing, how satisfied are you with our build process? And the second type is kind of a subjective, objective metric. I don't know how to call it, but basically we are asking during the last quarter, what was the longest time of you waiting for a build to actually be completed? That's the first thing. And the second thing that we ask is how often did you encounter test flakiness during the last quarter? That's the second question from this type. So basically we have, I think these four questions in our developers experience survey. I think that now our build process has like the highest ranking, the highest satisfaction rate among all other developers experience drivers that we have. Yeah, and that's something that I find really cool and proud about it actually. So yeah.
Hopefully folks are also on the ground with their ears to the ground, paying attention. If you do find something out in a survey that you wish you would have learned earlier, that's an opportunity that you just learned, and you can say, hey, thanks, or whoever said this, feel free, please, to say it sooner in person, to whatever, right? To start to build that culture of we want to do the best we can. We want that information sooner. I often joke that the simplest way to think of Agile is reducing the gap in time between taking an action and getting feedback. That's in the spirit of, get that feedback sooner.